Hello friends and welcome to CEC live lectures. Dear friends, today in philosophy we will discuss about the concept of introduction to the problem of personal identity. In this lecture we will try to understand this concept of definition of self through various philosophical contexts. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Hello, viewers. So today, in today's lecture, we will be talking about the problem of personal identity as is considered and studied in philosophy. So, first of all, in today's lecture, we'll be mainly looking at the broad, so to speak, the broad contours of this problem, how this problem is kind of set out, is kind of sort of what are the structure, different structures of different arguments that we consider under this theme. So let's first of all try to understand what we understand by the problem of identity. So in that context, what probably a good example to get an entry point into some kind of discussion around this topic would be, we often sort of look at our photographs of the past, when we were a child. And sort of when we then we gradually grew up and sort of went on to be sort of toddlers, 3 years old, 4 years old. We start walking, start going to school, and so on and so forth, and then we start going to college, or take up different jobs, and then so on and so forth. We will look at our past photographs to revive sort of some of the memories that we have of the past, but even in those photographs, if I'm sort of looking at my photographs, I know who I am, which person, so to speak, maybe in a group of individuals, is me. So, but at the same time, the overall idea here is that, when I look at some of the past pictures, I have a very clear idea of who I am in a particular picture. But the problem here at hand is that what kind of a warrant do I have? What kind of a reason generally do I have to say, well, this is me in this picture? Because obviously, when I look at the photograph, it's a person, it's a child who looks absolutely different from what I look like today. It's of it has a very different, say for example, body weight, and a full-grown person generally has sort of several times, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times in the weight the person is born with. So that way, the face has changed, the appearance has changed, and so many things have changed. So how come I'm still aware? I still have this idea in my mind that all these photographs, which have some person whom I identify myself with, and all those pictures which have which look very different, which are sort of very much different from each other. I believe that all of them are my pictures. They in a certain way sort of are certain kind of image captures of me. It's me all through in these pictures. So to put it in a slightly different way, and the idea here is that qualities that are associated with me, say for example, whatever kind of qualities we may be talking about, voice tone, appearance, hair color, and then so on and so forth. Most of our body appearances change drastically as we age. But still, there is some kind of an idea of me that continues and stays with me throughout my life. Whenever I'm talking about myself, I use this one-letter word very meaningfully. I seem to know very well who is the person that I'm talking about when I use the pronoun I. And similarly is the case with the second person, third person. I know I might have known a person sort of through time. I know that is the same person. Also, apart from that, there's been a lot of emphasis upon knowledge of the self, whether it's this Greek tradition or whether it is in Indian philosophical traditions. So say for example, right at the door of the temple of Apollo, in Greece, it's written, "Know thyself." So when we talk about knowing oneself, which is one of the dominant themes in several philosophies, who is this self that is being talked about? Which self? What exactly is the idea behind self about which we need to know? In that context, we can also remind ourselves of several classical Indian traditions. Say for example, Vedanta tradition, where there's a lot of emphasis upon self-knowledge. As a matter of fact, one of the texts is called Atmabodh, meaning self-awareness. So knowing the self is again a dominant theme in Indian philosophy as well. So how do I when we talk about the knowledge of self, what is it that we are talking about? What is that idea of the self that is something that is essential to me, that forms, so to speak, my identity, that accounts for what actually I am. Actually, to illustrate this point, maybe we could take an example from one of the modern saints of India named Swami Ramtirth. Swami Ramtirth, in one of the volumes of his book, which has several volumes, some 8 or 9 of them, is titled "In the Woods of God's Realization." So in one of those volumes, Swami Ramtirth cites tells us a story where there is this prince who pays a visit to one of the saints and insists that he wants to meet the god. So this saint apparently is claims to know God, and he preaches about God and so on and so forth. So this prince insists that he wants to know. He wants to meet God. He wants to know about God. So the saint, in turn, tells the prince that, see, if you insist on meeting the God, I need to tell God who you are, who has come to meet him or her. And so, what do I tell him or her? What do I tell God who has come to meet him? So then. The prince says, well, tell him that Prince so and so, Prince so and so, whatever his name was, has come to meet him. But then the saint says, well, it's not you. This is your name. Your name is not you. So God is going to ask, who is it that is coming to meet me? Who wants to meet me? So then, Prince says, well, tell him that, the son of so-and-so, King so-and-so has come to meet him. So then the saint says, well, this is your lineage. This tells us about your father. It doesn't tell us about who you are. So I need to tell him who the person is who has come to meet the God. So this way, it kind of continues. He sort of gives several other designations that sort of I come from such and such kingdom, but the saint says, well, this is the place you belong. This is not you. What God would want to know is who you are. So this example in a certain way presents the problem to us in its particular aspect. The idea, the main problem, which is at the core of what we call the problem of personal identity is what exactly is it that that I'm talking about when I'm talking about my personal identity. Just like in this example, if we sort of identify ourselves with our name, but that looks insufficient because it's just our name. Our name, as a matter of fact, could have been different. I'm not my name. I'm not just my name. As a matter of fact, in several cases, we during a lifetime we change names, at times more than two. At times we have different names. We are called by a different name by our parents, and we are called by a different name at our office. So name is not what who we, is not what who we are. And if we say, well, I teach such and such place. I'm a teacher. That tells us about our profession. But that's again not a sufficient condition. Sort of people change professions as well, or at the same time, people could be could be engaged in different activities. Somebody could be an independent writer, could be writing sort of stories, could be writing books, could be sort of writing academic books as well. So that way, it doesn't, so to speak, form, our designations, our professional designations do not constitute, so to speak, do not seem to at least, form the core part of our identity. There seems to be, nothing necessary about them, to sort of constitute. To sort of account for, to present themselves as the main candidates to explain our identity. So the idea overall here that we try to sort of see from this example I cited from Swami Ramtirtha's book is that one of the main issues that we talk about when we talk about the problem of personal identity is that we are looking for some kind of definition of personal identity. We want to know what are the sufficient conditions for something to qualify as somebody's identity. What are necessary conditions to which would qualify some notion to be called as our identities as such. So that's the basic idea. Most of the time, what we believe is that we know something in virtue of some of the abiding qualities that a thing has. Say, for example, water has certain qualities, fire has certain other kind of qualities, some essential qualities. But from that point of view, we are always we gain new qualities we shared some old qualities. There's hardly anything that remains throughout with us. As a matter of fact, if we look at there are certain examples available to us from the biological world, where we find that the sort of main organic identity of certain biological organisms changes entirely. And this was something that had intrigued early philosophers, among who was also Aristotle. Aristotle, as a matter of fact, in his one of his major works, Historia de Animalia, there he sort of believes that he presents the idea that like gives birth to like. So there is some kind of an essential continuity, sort of not only across the lifespan of a particular organism, but from the parents to the offspring, from one generation to the other. So he believed that say for example, fish would give birth to its own kinds. So there is this kind of linear some kind of a motion that's going on, and like sort of always causes like to happen. And it goes on, and things that way it doesn't change. He was not aware of the fact that things also evolve, something that we start realizing only mainly after Darwin. That across sort of species change. When we are able to look better into the past, we know that all the species are evolving. So, but Aristotle thought that there is some kind of a pattern, from in the way sort of organisms grow, and this and it carries on, and there is some kind of a certainty and necessity about this horizontal flow of time, sort of from one generation to another, within an individual species. But then he also saw certain aberrations. He came across, carcasses of certain animals, and he saw that some small animals at times are discovered to be coming out of those carcasses, and he probably at that time wouldn't know that they come from outside to basically eat the decaying body of the other animal. He instead thought at times what happens is that like doesn't give birth to like, and some kind of aberrations can occur. But the reason why we're talking about it here is that he sort of, since he had a lot of interest in biology also, he also talked about certain kind of transformations. I mean, in Greek thought we find discussions about it at more than one place. Something called metamorphosis. So, say for example, if we look at the life cycle of a butterfly, we know that when this organism comes out of its egg, it seems to belong. It seems to have a very sort of different set of characteristics, and if we try to classify that organism which comes out of the egg, it probably belongs to a different species altogether, because it crawls, and in that case it would if we put it in the classification system, it will belong to a different set of insects like centipedes and so on, who crawl. But then it sort of constructs some kind of cocoon around it, and hibernates, and when sort of it breaks open its cocoon, a different kind of animal seems to come out, which does not share many characteristics with what it was before it cocooned itself, before it constructed, before it hid itself behind this cocoon. So this must, of course, have been absolutely astonishing for early thinkers. how could this complete transformation happen? And sort of this is a kind of change, in species, so to speak. It's almost as if there is some kind of there's some kind of something which earlier was in a different body, and now the body, which is housing, so to speak, the organism has undergone a complete transformation, something that we don't find happening in other species. Now, such cases, sort of press hard upon us to think about, identity. Is it still the same animal, or are these two animals? What has happened here? Like, I mean, is it sort of the organism which comes out of the eggs of the butterfly? Was it a different animal altogether? Did it, when it constructed a kind of cocoon around itself, did it go into some kind of netherworld and got replaced by some other organism? How could we talk about surely there is some kind of continuity. We don't want to believe that there is a complete break here. We want to believe that there is a continuity of some kind of continuity, and therefore there is some identity which persists through the life cycle of a butterfly. But at the same time, the change is so drastic. It sort of absolutely presses us, presses upon us to think about what is still the same, to account for the identity of the organism. Similarly, this is not the only example. We know about frogs as well. The organism that comes out of egg, is more like fish. It stays in water. It breathes like fishes do. And then so on and so forth. But it grows on to become a different kind of being altogether, which has a different kind of way of breathing, which has a different kind of respiratory system altogether. Fishes work with a very different kind of respiratory system. So there is some kind of a complete transformation. It's like from transformation to transformation of the same organism, as earlier as fish, and from fish getting transformed to a different kind of animal altogether, which respires in a different way and stays on land mostly. So this way, the problem of personal identity, to look back at it again, basically is the problem regarding what is the so to speak, the set of properties, the constitutive set of properties, which are sufficient and also necessary to account for who we think we are. One way, to think about it is that we could say, well, we are individuals which have some kind of sort of discrete moments that we live through. So, but those moments we just can't stop it at that. We can't say, well, this person that I was at time T1 and at time T2, these are different persons. That we just don't want to live with that idea. We want to believe that even though the person that I was at time T1 had a different set of properties, and the person that I am now has a different set of properties, but there is something that has continued to be a part of me, which which accounts for my identity, so to speak. So now when we try to define the nature of something, when we try to talk about identity of something, what a thing is, again, there could be different ways, of course, of talking about it. We could talk about it from the point of view of anthropology. We could talk about it from the point of view of psychology. We could talk about it from the point of view of philosophy, and so on and so forth. But there are two major ways, in which we could sort of talk about personal identity. And one of these ways is, to talk about it from the point of view of, say, for example, from the empiricist point of view. We know that earlier there were, there were these two main ways of, doing philosophical inquiry. So one was, to talk about things from the empiricist point of view, and the other one was to talk about it from the rationalist point of view. So friends, we'll continue our discussion on personal identity. We'll talk about how, empiricists probably would want to talk about personal identity, and how rationalists would delineate this problem. So we'll take a short break here, and we'll return after a few moments. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about the problem of identity. We saw what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the problem of identity. What is the core problem here? What is the core issue here? And we tried to understand the problem through different examples. And then we want to talk about what could be the different perspectives towards the problem. What could be different methodologies to engage with the problem of identity. Now, if we try to look at the problem of identity, say for example from the point of view of rationalists, then we don't want to give much importance, say for example to the empirical aspect of it. Say for example, like what it looks like, what is it, what kind of experience should we associate with the identity of a person that we are talking about. What kind of experiences are constitutive, definitive of identity of a person. So, from the rationalist point of view, we probably wouldn't want to talk much about that aspect. We wouldn't rather want to talk about some kind of idea that sort of abides all through in us, or maybe we may want to talk about it from the pure reasoning point of view, from purely rationalist point of view. So one idea comes from Leibniz. He gives us certain laws about identity, and according to these laws, I mean the major idea in Leibniz law of identity is that something is identical, to itself. I mean, if it has the same, if two things have exactly the same set of properties, then then that thing is actually one. I mean, no two different things can have exactly the same set of properties, because in that case it wouldn't be sort of two things, it would rather be one. So in this law which is called identity of the indiscernibles. So here, when we talk about identity in pure so to speak mathematical terms, then we are talking about identity purely in terms of ideas. And this is how we in that case, this is how we'll have to talk about it. Certain set of properties which sort of abide by us all through, which always stay with us, and in the moment any of the qualities, those qualities which is associated with us goes, then it's no more the same thing. It's a different thing, because then if things have different set of qualities, then they are two, then they are not one. So that way, if we want to consider, if we want to account for the problem of personal identity from this point of view, then there is hardly anything, there is hardly any property that stays with us all through, because three main candidates which are there before us, our body, mind, and memory, body, soul, and memory. And also dominant amongst them is prima facie, we generally sort of associate somebody's identity with the body, but and of course the features associated with it, what a person looks like, and so on and so forth. But this demand that is put upon the notion of identity within the rationalist framework is probably a very is a demand which is very, very difficult to make, to sort of account for, because there's hardly anything that doesn't change. Our faces change, but if our appearance is all that we are, then it could change. As a matter of fact, though certain technology is not available to us, which would give a total face transplant to somebody, such that it's not even visible. It's just like a person is now looking like a completely different person, and there is no sign on that person showing that the person has gone through some kind of change. But you'll find that several TV serials, especially in India, take some kind of poetic license, on this account, and the people who watch those serials, it seems to go down with them. So, but the idea here is that just the appearance is not good enough. It can change. It can it can appear, at least logically. As a matter of fact, as better and better technologies are available, it will become possible indeed. Appearance, mere appearance is not something that could account for the main qualities, identity that we associate ourselves with. body is certainly not a good candidate for like this, and sort of the kind of demand that Leibniz is putting before us is too difficult, so to speak, to meet if we also think of ourselves as embodied human beings. We are not simply a numeric value. So in like an only way, probably we can talk about sort of something that absolutely abides with us is maybe we occupy same space and time all through our lives, all through our entire life. The time and space that I occupy in the world at any particular time, nothing else occupies the same space with me at the same time. So probably that time and space reference, could be the only thing that is abiding. But that reduces us to some kind of numeric identities, to some kind of numeric entities, which seems to be some kind of identity without a flesh. Without any substance to it, without any without any content to it, and also, it doesn't look like a very plausible idea, because not only is we who occupy certain time and space, which is always occupied by us and by any particular individual and nothing else in the world. But see, that is if that is how we account for something that is abiding in us, then that is also the case with other things like chairs and tables and TVs and so on and so forth. So that way, like that in a certain way, if we are merely numeric entities, that in a certain way seems to trifle the issue. It seems to sort of completely trivialize the robustness of the idea of identity that we generally suppose it to have. So that way, this idea seems to be something kind of too feeble. At the same time, if we look at Descartes probably doesn't sort of directly talk about the problem of identity within sort of within the framework of his inquiry, because his inquiry is set out in a very different direction. But if we were to talk about the problem of identity from his point of view, then probably something that's absolutely essential about us, that is absolutely sort of necessary, non-contingent about us, is that we are thinking beings. But again, there content, it's not the content of thinking that matters. What we can absolutely be certain about is that some thinking is being done. Say, for example, even if I'm doubting that I'm doubting, it only sort of exemplifies doubt. It only sort of consolidates doubt, which is a particular kind of thinking, but doesn't, so to speak, sort of presents itself as a challenge, to the activity of doubting. So that way, it's not the content of thought, but the fact that whenever I talk about myself, there is some kind of mental activity going on within our consciousness. So that mental activity is something that's absolutely essential to us. Thinking is absolutely essential to us, and where that thinking occurs, soul is something that's something that seems to be absolutely a necessary, undeniable part of us. But again, the problem there would be that when we talk about identity, we are not only talking about the defining features of something. We're also talking about the principle of individuation, which sort of on the basis of which we could individuate one person from another. Now, any notion of identities coming, sort of like associated with, say, for example, soul, or some kind of sort of some kind of thinking which doesn't have content, some kind of a necessary abiding content to it. That these such kind of basis of identity wouldn't really account for wouldn't give us a kind of a leverage, some strong leverage for to account for individuation, how one soul could be different from another, and so on and so forth. So embodiment seems to be an important part. Whenever we're talking about identity, intuitively, the first candidate, which presents itself, as a strong, comes along with a strong candidature, to account for identities, is our body. But then the problem with the body is, as stated earlier, there is hardly anything that's abiding about it. All the qualities change. We gain weight, we lose weight, we start looking different. Our sort of hair color changes. Our sort of skin color, might change. There is nothing absolutely essential about the body. As a matter of fact, certain body parts are vestigial. Even if you remove them, no sort of real change occurs. In many cases, people have to go get their appendices removed, which is a part of their body. But it doesn't really take much away. So that way, bodies and in that in this particular context, we can also remind ourselves of a very useful example which is often cited whenever we are talking about the problem of personal identity, which is the way this problem is formulated by an early Greek writer named Plutarch. Plutarch wrote several literary works, and among them was also work titled "Life of Theseus." Now, Theseus, in Life of Theseus, Plutarch talks about this mythological figure Theseus, who sort of undertakes to kill his opponent, one of the devilish creature, namely Minotaur, who is supposed to have the head of a bull and body of a human being. So he sets out to kill this another mythological character named Minotaur, who lives in Labyrinth. So he goes there along with some Athenians who are captured by him, and then he sort of finally kills him and comes back on a ship called Ship of Theseus, and which sort of he forgets to sort of set the sail, and when he reaches, his father thinks that Theseus is not alive, and therefore he kills him. Therefore he kills himself. His father kills himself. Theseus' father kills himself by jumping into the sea, and Theseus is declared the king of the place. But the way the problem is set out is that Athenians celebrate this war and winning over of Theseus, winning of Theseus over Minotaur by taking out this ship annually. And through the time, like every part of the ship, because we know that wooden sort of blocks are something that undergo sort of some kind of decay. So old parts start decaying, and then though they have to be replaced, they are replaced by new wooden blocks, or blocks are made of some other metal, and this way there comes a point when all the wooden blocks that initially made the ship where it was, that the ship of Theseus. Now all the wooden blocks are eventually replaced. Now the question that arises is, and the question and why it's important from the point of view of personal identity, is that now when all the wooden blocks which were initially there have been replaced, do we have a reason to still believe and say that it is the same ship of Theseus? Do we have good point? Is there a good point in celebrating the victory of Theseus by taking his ship out into the sea? Because all the parts have been now replaced, and in a certain sense, we could say it's no more the same ship. Because all the different parts of the ship have already changed. And now to complicate the matters, a different kind of a turn is given to this example. Now, suppose each time somebody was taking the old wooden blocks out, there was some person X who kept collecting those parts. And he kept, keeping them at one particular place. He collected all of them, and eventually, when all the parts were replaced, he put all of them together, and he sort of, made a new ship out of them, looking, exactly like, this other ship, which has all the parts replaced. Now, this person, of course, this wouldn't be a functional ship, because it would have most of these wooden blocks not in a good condition, and therefore it wouldn't be a ship which would be ready to go out into the sea. So it wouldn't have the kind of functional unity that is required of an actual ship. But if for all other reasons, that person X, who collected all these parts, put them together into a ship, he probably has a reason to say, well, this is the original ship. And the other ship, which other people are taking out to celebrate, the victory of Theseus over Minotaur, is actually not, is qualitatively different, not only numerically different. As a matter of fact, it doesn't have any of the parts on which, Theseus ever stood. So this is, in that sense, it has no connection with the old, Theseus. Whereas, qualitatively speaking, this other ship, which is not ready to go out into the sea, is the original one, qualitatively original one, which has more robust kind of qualitative association with the mythological character Theseus. So now this problem puts us into a strange kind of a dilemma. Now and how we relate it back to the problem of body. Body is not very different from this ship. We know that after a span of few years, almost every single cell inside us has changed. So it's just like removing those wooden blocks and getting them replaced by some new wooden blocks. So that being the case, there is nothing inside our body after a particular time, which on the basis of which we could say, well, it's the same body. That being the case, obviously, then we would be, if somebody says, well, body is not in that case a good candidate to account for, identity of a person, then, I think we will have to we'll have to agree to that person. If somebody says, well, body, since there is nothing that is abiding within us, within our body, there is nothing that stays the same in the body. Therefore, it's not the body which gives us a certain kind of identity. So that way, there are, there are certain set of problems because of which body, though it intuitively seems to us that this is something, something that we could associate our identities with. But as we just noticed, probably it wouldn't be a good idea to associate sort of our notions of identity with the body. Now, what could be the next good candidate to account for to account for somebody's identity? Probably the next good candidate would be a mind or soul. But soul again, sort of as we talked about it a little sort of earlier, soul, the idea of soul comes along with its own set of issues. If we are talking about soul in that metaphysical sense, soul, the idea of soul that we have always believed in. And this is another idea that occurs so naturally to us, and is also a dominant idea in when it comes to religion, and it's been exploited in sort of several ways. Say, for example, sort of this idea that soul, even within a lifetime, could go from one body into another was one of the dominant themes, and as a matter of fact, it's exploited in hagiographies and biographies of some sort of big philosophers. One among them is Shankara. So Shankara, as we know, sort of from historical point of view, he was having debate with Mandan Mishra, who belonged to a different school. And just about the time when Mandan Mishra is losing the debate, his wife comes into the picture, and she asks certain questions. He puts certain questions to Shankara, which pertain to married life and the institution of marriage. And in order to answer those questions, Shankar had to sort of go out of his body and enter into another body to gain those experiences and come back. So it seems like a dominant idea, and if we take this idea into account, it seems that body is a mere instrument, and it's some instrument that could be used by different souls. So like there are different set of problems with soul, about which we'll talk about later, because soul also, apart from other things, is supposed to be the storehouse of different sense impressions and so on and so forth. So today we'll have to stop at this because of the paucity of time. We'll continue our discussion on personal identity, and we'll talk about whether soul or could be a good idea, and the third candidate, memory, which sort of philosophically is taken very importantly by some of the later philosophers, sort of foremost amongst them Locke. So we'll talk about these issues in our next lecture. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Dear friends, we hope that today's lecture was informative and useful to you. On that note, we would like to thank Dr. Verma for coming here and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, for watching our lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.